Hello, everyone. I'll be continuing in English since the program will be in English. We're here for the first event of our new program series titled New Approaches to Data, which is in collaboration with SALT, a project that revolves around Reşad Ekrem Koç's Istanbul Encyclopedia, the new project of SALT's, which is in the process of being digitally archived at the moment. And within this collaboration, we serve as a system developer, a strategic partner to help aid them into expanding their vision so that they can make healthier decision makings in terms of the future of this archive and how it will be presented. We're here with Channel Studio here, which is a technology and design studio based out of New Museum's Art and Tech Incubator. New Inc. And we're here with Denton and Seth Kranzler, who are also educators which teach classes at Parsons, RISD, New School, and more. And they'll be talking more about new approaches to data in terms of machine learning as a design tool. Because in their project that they'll be talking about a bit more specifically, they do a lot of systems design or archive projects, which is in relation to machine learning. So we'll hear more about that from them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lalin. First off, everyone, we're so happy and thankful to be here with you guys. We just arrived yesterday, and we actually got a chance to visit SALT this summer. We were doing some work traveling in Berlin and got to pop over in August, and it was incredible, and we're really happy to be back here.
Yeah, really great city.
So today we're going to be talking about new tools and techniques, new ways of thinking about archives, with technology as kind of a driver for propelling them, and kind of imagining alternative futures for archives. I think we'd start with maybe just talking a little bit about us and our studio practice. So we run a studio called Channel. Seth and I started it about 2 years ago. Basically, we were looking at a lot of design studios and kind of felt like they were treating technology as an afterthought or as something separate from their practice.
Yeah, and at the same time, we were looking at a lot of the creative tech world and things that were coming out of kind of the technology world, and seeing that they were lacking a lot of the polish and finish to be products that could be on the market for everyone to use.
For the last 2 years, we've been based out of New Inc., which is the New Museum's cultural incubator. The New Museum is the main contemporary art institute in New York City, and it's been an amazing place to call our home. We sit with architects and product designers and people doing all different kinds of creative practices, and it's been really incredible to be there. I guess to kind of set up our studio and kind of the thesis is that we felt that could we use technology to push design harder, further, and faster? And in many ways, this is not a new idea. If you look at Neville Brody, who is the graphic design superstar of the 90s, or Muriel Cooper at MIT, they were using the newest technology of their era to push design harder and faster. And in the same ways, we're looking to technology as tools for design. And a major part of our practice has come from combining design and machine learning. So in the past 2 years, the world generated 90% of all recorded information. That's a lot. And if we're going to make sense of any of that and to make it usable for humans, we need to radically rethink the interfaces for how we access, explore, and make sense of data. If you look at many museum websites with so many amazing artifacts in their collection, most don't have a way of looking at them better than a list. No one's going to click through hundreds of pages of paintings to try to find one that they're looking for, let alone one that they didn't even know that they wanted. So a lot of our work has revolved around taking these new tools and finding new innovative ways of exploring large data sets.
Yeah, so basically data sets could be museum collections, they could be archives, they could be a record label's music collection. There's so many different ways this can kind of manifest itself. But kind of fueling all of this is, over the past 8 years, the field of machine learning, in particular deep learning, has really grown kind of like leaps and bounds. So things like image recognition or pose detection. This is Facebook's dense pose. Natural language processing. I don't know if anyone saw OpenAI's GPT-2, or now there's a new company called Hugging Face that's developing really crazy language models that can generate text. And then just recommendation algorithms. They're all kind of coming from the research labs into the real world. This is Teachable Machine? Yeah, Teachable Machine from Google's Creative Lab. You can go online and train your own neural network or your own AI to do little tasks like play sounds or trigger images. But we've been experimenting with a lot of these kind of different tools as they come out, and we've been really learning a lot about what's possible with them. And it seems like every day I check, I go online and there's some new tool, some new application, but it's all towards kind of creating spaces where semantic relationships between items can be surfaced and explored. So machine learning has really proven itself to be an excellent tool for organizing and digesting these data sets and breaking this information down in a way that can reveal interesting stories, interesting lines of thought among a large data set. So one of the projects we're working on is with Ghostly International. They're a record label based out of New York and been around for about 20 years. And it's kind of based around the idea that the visual experience of browsing music hasn't really changed much in the past 5 years. Still very list-oriented. iTunes came out, it was almost the same approach. And the biggest advancements have really been in recommendation algorithms. So Spotify's Discover Weekly is, game changer. But these are sort of a black box. They're opaque to the user, and I think a lot of the context behind why you're getting recommendations or why you're discovering music is completely lost. So, thank you. So we're building an experience that can surface the timbral, emotional, and semantic relationships between different songs, artists, and albums, actually. And we're looking to create new ways of discovering music and making playlists. So one side of this is basically a 2D layout of all of Ghostly's music. So every song that Ghostly has published, organized, and we'll get into this a bit more later in the talk, but organized by kind of their sound fingerprint, their genre fingerprint. So basically there's this, I think we have the demo in there actually, but there's this kind of 2D space where you can transition seamlessly from different genre to genre. And then we can see these kind of predefined genre clusters. Also working with kind of the same technology, generating playlists automatically. So selecting 2 songs in the catalog, and then seamlessly transitioning between those 2 songs by a variety of factors: BPM, like kind of emotional valence, speed, volume, harmonic content. All of these different things are kind of factored into generating this playlist. So what's the technology? I don't know if we have any people who are really into the really techie side. So how are we doing it? We're basically doing feature extraction. We're taking all of these songs, we're extracting, we trained a convolutional neural network on this catalog. We extract fingerprints from each of the songs. This is kind of a simplification of our neural network. And then with those features, with those specific features, we can do a number of different things. One of the things we can do is dimensionality reduction. So we can take those maybe 1,000 dimensions and reduce it to 2 dimensions using something called UMAP, which is I'll get into later. We can look at the clusters that are present automatically. So when we break it down in those 2 dimensions, where are all of these objects in the catalog sort of centering themselves? Is there something unique? Why are they automatically centering themselves there? And what maybe all of the ambient music has, for example, in the Ghostly project, all the ambient music clusters in one area because it has a specific sound. So yeah, finding those distinct groups and then labeling them later. And then using those features, if we have a multidimensional space, we can treat it like a graph. This is an entire field of mathematics, but essentially, if you think of a 2D space, you can draw a line between every point and every other point. And then you can do things like, give me the shortest distance between 2 points, which could be a playlist. And then we use all of this stuff to do that.
One thing also I wanted to mention earlier, we're a team of 6 now, and I wanted to shout out to our team. But we have a designer, a 3D motion graphics designer, Ruru, who works with us, Evan, our machine learning data scientist, and a 3D graphics programmer, and as well as a bunch of other freelance help. But just wanted to say this is all a group effort, and Evan, our data scientist in particular, is incredible, and he's running experiments all the time, and that's a lot of what fuels the creative activity that we do at the studio.
We also, so another project we've been working on, or have worked on, is with the Williams College Museum of Art. So they're a small museum based out of Williams College in Massachusetts, in New England, obviously. And so we were tasked with creating experimental ways of exploring their collection. They have around, I know it's 12,500 actual images. The collection is, I think, around 15,000. And they just developed an API to access this collection. They had metadata about each artwork, but also statistics about how the collection was used over time. So all sorts of very, very interesting information. So we were kind of just thinking about what have we never seen before, even from like a non-machine learning basis. We had seen some examples of people sorting collections by color. I think the Cooper Hewitt does it, Google has done this, and we were like, okay, well, what about if we create a color space? We have the primary color of each artwork, so each of these little dots represents an artwork. Why not look at a color space? So we mapped everything into the HSL color space, which is a polar coordinate system. And we made this is all web-based, so this is a website where you can go in and limit, you could say, I want to look at only the red slice. And then you could click on each, this video doesn't show, but you could click on each painting and see more detail about it. So kind of like an innovative way of doing color search. We also did a project around organizing images by visual similarity. So some advancements in deep learning in the past, I guess it's been four years now, allow us to apply some techniques that select artworks based on their visual similarity and cluster them. So, for example, in their collection, they've accessioned all of their frames separately, and in this broad image similarity view, the frames all get put in one specific area, and these are all black and white headshots. They all get put in one specific area. And so I think a lot of curators kind of shudder at this approach, but we find it really interesting in approaching a collection based purely off of visual appearance. And then one of the last projects we did with them was creating this algorithm that recommends you the most similar and dissimilar objects in the collection. So you could select an artwork and see. So for example, this is an African mask. Most similar are other African artworks, and then on the right here are most dissimilar, which is the Japanese artwork, and trying to create new ways of exploring the collection based on recommendations.
This spring, we launched a major project for Microsoft and the Nobel Prize. They asked us to build a digital archive for the 19 female laureates in the sciences, a process which involved collecting and digitizing all of their correspondence, their interviews, scientific papers, images, collections from their personal lives. And so we took all this content and we used Microsoft AI to map it all together to do kind of semantic clustering like we've been doing for some of these other projects. And then we organized all this data into 19 visual essays and an Explore page, which is up on nobelprize.org right now. So these are selections from those visual essays. And that was a very intense project because there was so much content there to work through. But
it's also a last-minute project.
And a last-minute project, which happens pretty regularly. But it was extremely rewarding. The primary goal for the project was open up science to women and take some of these female rock stars of the scientific world and humanize them and show how what their lives were like to get there, and not just being intimidated by the prestige of their final accomplishments. And some of these stories were incredible.
Yeah, I think one of the most amazing things about this project, it was really fun from a design and a technical perspective, but also we really became familiar with the laureates. And this part, it's not shown here, but there's an Explore page where all of their their correspondence with their family, all of their academic papers, all of their family photos are there. And you see the full life of these women, and they're scientists and they're academics and intellectuals, but they're also mothers and daughters. So it was really incredible.
One of them that really stuck with me was Rita Montalcini. She was in fascist Italy in the 30s, and she was Jewish, and she was forbidden from working at the university. And she was doing experiments in the closet of her bedroom with a microscope, and then went on to win the Nobel Prize. So just incredible stuff. And I think this also, part of what we love about this project is it's not just about showing content in new ways. It's about finding meaningful stories and trying to tell them in new and interesting ways. So another project we did, this was just kind of a fun side project. We founded the Center for American Politics and Design in 2018. And what we did is we collected all of the logos of every candidate running for federal office in the United States. So the US is a very big country. There's almost 1,000 of them, and we had to manually scrape them all and build out a really intense spreadsheet. But we don't have a video of this right here, but it's pretty fun because you can filter. I want to see what female candidates in Democrat-leaning states with yellow logos, and it'll just show you all those logos in one place. It's also the kind of thing where by themselves, the graphic design, it's not especially good. But when you're looking at like 1,000 of them all together, it starts to get really weird, and you start to see all these interesting relationships that wouldn't be apparent by looking at them on their own. There were also some funny, wacky, like you could see where people were ripping off of corporate logos, or, I mean, these were our personal faves, but we got a lot of press for this project. We were on the front page of the Washington Post and a bunch of design press. We're hoping to continue doing this in elections, because this is also the kind of project that it's cool when you do it for one election, 1,000 logos, but if we do it for the next 20 years, it'll be way more interesting.
It's its own data set, yeah.
It's a real data set.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we also wanted to talk about some of just the design work that we do, because we are kind of a full service studio or agency, and I think we have a lot of focus on machine learning, we have a lot of focus on design, but we also do just straight up design projects. I guess this is sort of an archive.
It's
right?
an archive.
Oh,
yeah, it counts.
Okay, I guess, yeah, I mean, there's...
It's not a machine learning powered archive.
Well, not yet.
Yeah, we're working on that. So this is something we're in progress on, and actually so we started the studio 2.5 years ago now, and this project originated at the very beginning of the studio, because we started the studio and we were like, oh my God, we have to redo our personal websites.
Because people are going to look at them.
Yeah, whatever. And I had to happen to design Seth's site for him using a font from Mac OS 6. And I only had like screenshots of it. And Seth was like, this isn't going to work. I want them to be crisp. I want a crisp web font.
Yeah, they were like old bitmap typefaces that don't load in browsers. And then because we had just started the studio, we had no work. I spent a week trying to figure out how to convert this typeface into a vector font, which maybe only some people will understand why I tried to do that. And in the process of doing that, I think we found all of these fonts online. So kind of, this is a bit of the history of it, but we found all these really cool fonts online and realized that there was this entire generation of typefaces, bitmap typefaces, from before vector fonts became popular. And that it was really interesting and kind of relevant for a lot of reasons. And it was like, oh, hey, we should make a zine about this. And that zine obviously turns into a book, and now
it's an archive project and a book. And,
yeah.
But yeah, I think part of what we loved was that about these typefaces in particular is they're ugly. Like this has been relegated to the dustbin of typographic history. No one's talking about these typefaces. No one even knows about most of them. And so a lot of the inspiration for this project was, can we take these typefaces and breathe new life into them, show them to the world, and who knows what people will make or discover with them. But kind of bringing it together and trying to breathe new life into this period.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of history behind it. This guy, Dr. Hell, which is just like it's such a ridiculous name, invented kind of the early first digital typeface, which was using CRT, cathode ray tubes, to project the typeface onto a typesetting plate. And then also designed the first digital type font. So this is back in the 60s. Kind of a little bit different than what we're really looking at with this project, but it was interesting to look back at some of the history. And another kind of like milestone was Donald Knuth, who he basically decided in 1978, he was like, I think he published his book and then republished it, and by the time he had republished it, they had changed how they did printing, and he had this beautiful printed original edition, and when they reprinted it or something like that, they were using these new digital formats, and he was like, this looks so bad. I'm going to reinvent digital. He's such a mathematician. He's like, I'm going to reinvent whatever for myself. He's like, oh, it'll take me a year, and it took him 10 years. And he finally finished LaTeX, which is what a lot of mathematicians use to typeset. Yeah, some early, Icarus was like an early way to define outline shape of characters. But I think that really where the story started for us was with, I mean, it starts a little bit before with us, but the really interesting stuff happened when Apple released the Lisa. And it was kind of like the one of the first personal computers with a graphic user interface, but it also was one of the ones that released like the most amazing set of typefaces with it. And it was because it was a design-led company. At the same time, kind of PostScript came out, and you could do vector printing, but yeah, TrueType, I don't know if you have...
Yeah, just on vector printing, the way it used to work is that you would have a bitmapped font on your computer screen, but then it got communicated to the printer, and the printer was actually what would figure out how to make it have smooth curves instead of the screen itself. And a lot of these limitations were coming from the screen. In the late 80s and really in the early 90s, this is when you start to see vector fonts come out. Sorry we're nerding out a little bit here on typefaces, but we're a design studio and this is a design talk, so hopefully you guys knew what you're coming in for.
It's like the perfect storm of historical technology and design for the two of us.
So yeah, like we were saying, this is an interesting time for type because text was the primary way that you interacted with computers. It was all text-based. What's interesting is until Apple came out and was really introducing nicely designed typefaces that were really well crafted, a lot of these typefaces are just a total mess. They're copying one another. You see IBM copying other people's typefaces. They're being like stretched and used in all weird ways, which is pretty fun.
But then basically the Apple II comes out and there's support for software like this, which was, this is a video, right?
It should be.
I think it's a long video. Yeah. So the Beagle Bros came out with the software where you could basically... Is this the one that I think it is? Is this the font?
No, they're just talking.
Oh, okay.
There was a lot of software where you could make your own typefaces on a computer, and that was something that historically was a very high barrier to entry to make a typeface because you would be carving it out of metal. Also, so there's a democratic element to this.
Yeah, and also thinking about the fact that like the computer came around and was revolutionizing typesetting, which was kind of its own category, its own job, and now you could typeset your own pages in the computer.
And there's also just some amazing stories how the first graphical user interface being invented at Xerox Park. You have Susan Kerr,
she's in the MoMA permanent collection,
who's a legend, who designed some of the icons which actually still are kind of around, and was responsible for a lot of these early this like push at Apple to
yeah, so these are in MoMA's permanent collection.
Yep. And at the same time, you also start to see graphic designers starting to take this new technology, these new tools, and subvert them and use them in new ways. So you have David Carson, and they're bending things, they're breaking things, and designers hated this at the time. People were like, this is the ugliest stuff I've ever seen. But today, I feel like, I wouldn't say they're vindicated, but you definitely see the return of more complex design, and it's not just clean, minimal Apple aesthetics for everything, which I think is pretty fun. So just to talk about our project.
Yeah, so basically I was talking about how we collected all of these different specimens. I just went online and collected like 400 specimens. So from things like the Amiga, K-Pro, early Macintosh, obviously Sinclair, IBM, Commodore, TRS, a bunch of PC games that were interesting. That's a whole other world of bitmap typeface that we haven't touched because I don't think we're nerdy enough for that.
Yeah, that's a bottomless pit. It goes forever.
And then early like painting online or computer-based paint systems.
And this stuff was all buried in like obscure forums. It was not easy to find,
Yeah.
And it was not centralized at all.
So we just kind of printed them out. We created this, I mean, this is over 400 specimens in a book. We thought that like having it printed out would make it easier to work with. I don't know if it did, but...
Yeah, I don't know. It was emotionally helpful. I don't know. But we started looking at type samples. We did a residency on this project at the Media Archaeology Lab at the University of Colorado.
Yeah.
Which was incredible because we were looking at these digital versions of these typefaces, but there's so much more when you see them in the flesh. On computers where they were displayed, you have the glow of the CRT monitor, which kind of softens the curves a bit. But
this was a piece of software that we found while we were there. This is the same Beagle Bros. And you could go in and pixel by pixel edit a font and make your own font. And it was so cool. It was so limited, but really interesting.
We also went and photographed all of these computers that were in the collection because we're working on a book on this, and we felt it was important to see the context in which these type typefaces would live. And there's also just, they're so weird and ugly, and there's just such weird variety in there. I'm sorry, I feel like I'm selling you on bitmap type here, but we just really fell in love with these typefaces, and now 2 years later, basically, we're working with, well,
we have a plan to reissue these typefaces. It's in the works, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we might have something to announce on that in the next couple weeks. But working on creating variable weight fonts, variable weight versions, which is a new font format that you can do where you can use parameters. Instead of having a clean break between italic and bold, for example, you can interpolate in between. So using that to play with bitmap, increasing the pixelation or decreasing the pixelation. We're working on a book that will hopefully include interviews and formal type specimens, photographs, essays, and some of that historical content, but also kind of pulling from traditional typographic specimens. In the 19th century, for example, if you just made a new woodcut, you would create a really nice specimen for it, and no one was doing that for these typefaces in the 80s, but we think it's kind of cool to see them and see all the variety among them. And the last thing is we want to make a web archive too, because that's what we specialize in. So bringing these typefaces together in one place, and then doing fun things like maybe there's a type specimen that's a text adventure game and you get to swap out the fonts as you're playing them. Or drawing from that Beagle Bros example earlier, where you can edit your own font.
Yeah, like entirely in the browser, edit the font, download your font, and just do, kind of all these fun things that newer technologies in the browser can have enabled. But I think one of the things that we found is really, why is this period so interesting to us? I think was a question that we were asking. And I think, we were asking, like, why is this revival of retro computer aesthetics, like, where's it coming from? So I think, it's definitely something that's becoming more popular. We see it everywhere now. I forget what that effect is called, but where you notice something and all of a sudden you see it everywhere. That's us. So it's so popular now. So basically, we've kind of been looking at a lot of Byte magazine. Does anyone know that? Like early computing magazines. We were realizing how utopic early computing was, and it really is reflected in the design of the time. So like kind of a lot of promise in the future of computing, and very little actual capability in looking back on it. It was really kind of limited in what you could do. And kind of contrasted with now, you can do so much, and there's like so little promise, and everything. We're kind of so pessimistic. So kind of looking at this New York Times article is a great example of that. Like, I think we look back on these utopic times of technology with, I think it feels really good to look at these bitmap typefaces and think about logging into a computer that you weren't worried was tracking you, or printing out a banner for your friend's birthday and not worrying about everything else about technology.
So in this talk, I think, so we wanted to talk a bit about our work and some of what we're up to. We also wanted to just talk through some of what we're looking at and some examples and things that we've been thinking about as we've been building this practice in which archives and using machine learning for archives has become kind of a central theme. So this is one website that we really like. In Amsterdam, they were digging out a canal. And I think they were doing some kind of construction. It might have been for a subway or something. And they collected all the objects that they found in that canal. And they collected hundreds of years of objects, and then they mapped all of it.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. like,
because it goes all the way down to negative 119,000 years.
Yeah. And it's super cool to go through and you really see the vicissitudes of time. How at the beginning, you know, up at the top, you'll see cell phones and SIM cards and lighters. And down at the bottom, you'll see daggers and tools for, I don't know, breaking pots with skulls. I don't know.
But there's like the bottom is basically bones and shells.
Yeah.
And then as you go up, what's really funny about this archive actually, and we don't have the website open, but if you go to like the 1400s or something, there's all these old tobacco pipes. And then when you scroll up to like 2000s, there's all these like other pipes. And it's kind of like this consistent like pipes in Amsterdam canals through the ages.
We also don't have this here, but there's a great filtering mechanism where you can sort by object type and all different kinds of things. It's very cool and well executed.
But also just kind of like moving along one dimension, you know, just time and the progress of technology through objects. Does that work?
Yeah. So we use 3D sometimes. I'll lower the volume a little bit on this. We use 3D sometimes in our work, but we're also pretty skeptical about it because a lot of times the user experience can be very clunky. It can be hard to navigate through. People aren't used to the controls unless you're using like Cinema 4D or you're used to using 3D software on a regular basis. This is one example where we feel like they actually pulled off 3D in a way that is good.
Yeah, it's a funny subject matter. So this is basically, what does it say? 50 years of Swiss music charts. I don't know why Swiss music charts. I don't think of Switzerland when I think of the best music in the world. But basically, I'll need it for a second. But so basically, whatever is the #1 song stays kind of current as you're scrolling. I don't know how well this is translating, but
it's fun. It's worth checking out. And like we said, it's a pretty good example of using 3D to explore an archive. This is Google Arts and Culture and Google Creative Lab is doing a lot of the pioneering work in this field of kind of combining machine learning and design. This is an arts and culture experiment where you could play around with different colors and create a palette, and it'll find all of the works in their collection. I forget how many museums, but they have kind of a super collection of many museums' images together. And you can click Surprise Me, and it'll just pick a random palette for you. So something that's immediately visually very satisfying and fun to play around with.
Yeah. Should I talk about this one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so this is coins. I actually forget who this is with. This is just such an incredible, like, kind of physical approach to displaying a collection. So these are all of the coins in, I can't remember which specific collection this is, but where you can basically sort them into their own little stacks based on, right now we're looking at, we were looking at region, now we're looking at weight, and they have like 20 different ways of laying everything out. And then, let's see, we're gonna look at earliest date versus material. It's kind of interesting to see that like silver was much earlier. And then you could just like actually grab a coin and pull it out and make your own mini stack and explore it. And I think this is just, the other thing is that this experience, just from a technical perspective, runs really well. And I think that's one of the big things is now that computers are can handle a lot of the computational aspects of these experiences. Making something that's smooth and almost natural, reacts naturally is really incredible.
And that's something we talk about a lot when we teach, is how speed is a major user experience consideration, and how fast something loads. You really don't have that long for people to wait on a page. The nice thing is they're using circles, and usually I mean, that's what a lot of these experiences will do, it seems like, but they happen to be the actual object themselves. It's a little harder when you're doing sculpture or paintings that require more graphic detail, but we thought this did a really good job with animation of telling the story in a great way.
Yeah, and then just the Cooper Hewitt collection has a built-in, you can kind of select a color just to explore the collection with. It works pretty well, but just kind of interesting that they built it into a main part of their collection. I think really brave and interesting. The Cooper Hewitt is, I think, pretty adventurous in that sense. So, and this is actually a project from so the New York Public Library. They have like a labs. I'm not entirely sure about the kind of provenance of this project and how it started, but they have a huge document set, and I actually think there might be one missing from there, but they have these books called the Green Book. They're a travel guide, as it says here, published between 1936 and I think 1950 or something. All these different 1966. So I guess they have a bunch of them, and essentially it was places where black travelers would be welcome in the U.S. because at that time the segregation was still around, and so I don't know exactly who built this, but they took kind of this. It's almost like they appropriated like the Google Maps product to illustrate the experience of the time. So really, really interesting. You basically choose a start and an end point, and then it gives you like places where you can stop to stay and to eat.
And this was a super important book back in the middle of the 20th century, because for black Americans, so much of the South and even just across America was inhospitable to people of color. And this was like the only way to safely travel in the United States was using something like this. So it's what we like is it's taking this very important historical phenomenon, and you can read a lot about this, but bringing it into a digital way and showing that story in a different and new perspective.
Yeah, so transitioning.
Yeah, actually, Seth and I last year were teaching a class on using the web as an artistic medium, and that's something we think about a lot in our work. And we've looked at a lot of pioneers of computer art and things that they've done using computational means to create artworks in and of themselves.
Yeah, so I guess one of those pioneers is a New York City-based artist, Lillian Schwartz. She's still around, and she was one of the first artists to basically have her entire work be based in computational media. So she was just doing really amazing things like this.
And they just had a bunch of her work at the Whitney show last year.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And Muriel Cooper was another pioneer of internet art, or of computer-mediated art, rather. She was the co-founder of the MIT Press and used code to do graphic design. She co-founded the MIT Visual Language Workshop. So we like to look a lot at historical precedents for the work that we create. I think a way of kind of wrapping our brains around this task that we're trying to do with archives is really the sheer coincidence that the internet and machine learning are coming of age kind of at the same time. In the same way that capitalism and democracy are kind of these two separate things that are also happen to come together at the same time in the United States, and that was very foundational in how our government was formed. The web is really maturing as a medium, and that's something that we're really excited about in general. But looking back at the 90s, the early period or like the beginnings of the web.
Well, if it isn't.
This was I think we look back at this time because it looks so innocent and fresh to our eyes. This is what American Express's website was like. Google looked like this. The New York Times looked like this. The White House, this is the White House website. Adobe, Apple. And a lot of the early web was coming out of CERN. A lot of you are probably familiar with this. And it basically started as a way for academics to connect with one another and talk about their work and share what they were doing. They were basically like little personal home pages. And this early 90s period of the web with LiveJournal and AngelFire, I made my first website ever when I was like 7 years old on Max Pages because I wanted a website. I don't know why. But this was a time where the web felt very free and open and
magical.
Anyone could make anything they wanted, and they made really crazy, unique-looking stuff. And a lot of personality and a lot of artists were starting to use this. Like, for example, Leolina, this is a piece from 1997. My boyfriend came back from the war. A very famous early net art piece. It's bringing up these kind of interesting themes in a very free, open, and democratic way.
It also using kind of like the hypertext.
Yeah, using hypertext.
Yeah. Which as a concept was kind of new.
Which was groundbreaking. People were like, oh my God, no one's going to print books anymore. We're just going to have hypertext novels or something.
And novels won't be linear. And
yeah, which didn't happen because it's really hard to do that well. Yeah. But in contrast, we look at the contemporary web experience, and everything just kind of looks the same. It's all, a lot of this early kind of personal expression, this kind of radical move to design and code your own website has kind of just gotten lost. I don't know. It's kind of an unusual thing to make and code and design your own website today. And everything kind of has this clean sheen on top of everything. And it's kind of weird because it obscures what's actually happening on the web, that this is something that anyone can make a site. There are studies that many people don't even know that they're using the web when they're on Facebook and other things. It's interesting times. It's weird times. But also, it's a very exciting time to be making things for the web because the potential for graphics in terms of bandwidth and what modern computers can handle has increased so much compared to those early years in the 90s.
Yeah, I think in the early 90s you had documents online, and so you have your document, here's my resume, here's my mathematics study, and now you can build applications. And so really websites aren't websites anymore, they're now just mini applications every time.
And you see how the New York Times kind of, I guess it was 2011, came out with Snowfall, which was a total groundbreaker in terms of...
it was an avalanche.
Yeah, it was an avalanche in how to use different kinds of... Instead of... in the 2000s, there was this trend of kind of taking... like, if you had a PDF, you'd be flipping a page, and it would have a cheesy kind of digital animation of a page flipping, like kind of crappily. Yeah, kind of trying to replicate a real experience on the web. And instead of thinking about the web as a totally new way of experiencing information, print is such an incredible medium. It's so immersive. When you're reading a magazine, I mean, you're in another world. I am a print guy, so maybe that's revealing itself, but I love print. I don't think it'll ever be replaced. But on the web, it's totally new opportunities there to create new opportunities for discovery and for meaning and for layering different kinds of content, images, video, text, in interesting ways. So just wanted to talk very briefly about things that we're thinking about when we're designing some of these projects. So a lot of kind of traditional design techniques still matter a lot for these kind of archival experiences. If you look at, so Paul Rand, he designed Superstar, designed the IBM logo, ABC. He has this quote that design is relationships. It's relationships between form and content. And so a lot of what we're doing in terms of thinking through user experience is trying to use form to elucidate different relationships between things. So if harmony is where everything is uniform and the same, like the Gutenberg Bible, some of these principles of contrast are from Carl Dare. So contrast is based on a unity of differences. So you can have contrasts of size and weight and form, structure, texture, color, direction. And these kind of are things that we think about in terms of if you have this kind of high-level, large view of a data set, how do you take these things that could just be presented as the same? How do you bring in layers of differentiation and hierarchy between all of these large data sets and collections of large numbers of things? So some of the design challenges we've been kind of coming across in our work that I don't know that we have solved yet, but we're working really hard and thinking about it a lot and trying to solve them. One of them is this kind of overview to view problem, which is we're trying to explore in a high-level way so you could get a snapshot of lots of things in one view. The difficult part is how do you guide the user between seeing all these things together for the first time and getting them into the individual pieces of content. And so this is something that we've been seeing coming up in our work again and again. I don't know that we've cracked it yet, but I don't know that anyone else has either, and I hope that we are the ones that do.
I mean, I think it also comes down to application by application, kind of like how do you get, so you're saying kind of getting everyone in from the macro lens into micro lens. Each time it's a matter of guiding people along slowly. I don't think there's any one solution for all of them. It comes down to the fact that our process tends to be starting with this data, starting with whatever we're looking at, analyzing it, and finding that approach, and finding a design that will slowly guide people into from macro to micro.
Another kind of high-level concept we've been thinking about from a design perspective is what is the role of user agency? So there's an amazing lecture by David Rudnick, who is kind of the hottest graphic designer of our time right now. And he is talking about looking at relationships in movies and cinema, and especially this kind of like hyper-real movement in cinema. If you look in action movies where things are slowed down and the camera is moving and navigating and circling around the focus point. In a similar way, we watched this lecture, and I have been trying to think about how can we incorporate this into archives and creating ways that the user can almost be in control of that experience and kind of creating these pathways for the user to go down where they feel like they are the camera. They are the person that's directing the whole experience, but you're also designing it in a way that no matter what path they go down, it's going to be an interesting and rich experience for them.
I think we see this a lot with, like, one of the striking areas that we see this is when we do any sort of a music experience. So anything on the web that's like an interactive music experience tends to be, people know when things don't sound good. So if you design an interactive music experience where there's enough chance for you to make something that sounds really bad, people are going to go, oh, the website made this bad sound. And when they make something that sounds really good, they're like, I made that. And so I think you see that same translation across a music experience to like any sort of exploration. You know, if you're not finding what you're interested in, oh, this thing's a piece of crap. And then if you are finding what you like, then it's really amazing.
So one way we were thinking about this for the Microsoft and Nobel Prize project was having a few different ways that the user could enter the experience. So one, you could take this quiz and answer 3 questions, and it would find a laureate for you as a way of just kind of personalizing it. Again, this was our target demographic for this was young women in their late teens or early 20s. So finding a way to emotionally and personally connect laureates to them. You could browse through kind of a high-level menu of all the different laureates, or you could see all their data and all the archive with everything in one view. Another thing that we're working on that I don't know that we've solved this yet either, but finding ways to talk about what the archive is doing and how it's doing it so that users can have an understanding of what they're looking at without intimidating them or bogging them down with details. And this is something that I don't know that we've exactly found the solution to this, but it's something that we've learned looking at our work. For example, the archive page on this Microsoft project, it didn't say anywhere that we used machine learning to do these things. And I think that's something that, in retrospect, we were talking about it. It really should. I think there is some way that we will find this eventually, but a way of talking about how it's done that I think gives users a feeling like they are participating in this, and it's they're getting another layer of understanding. And then I think the last thing is just design challenges is how do you have it be something at the end of the day, it could be cool to just like click around and see how things go, but how do you give users something that they can walk away with that there's kind of a next point in the experience besides just pure play? So this is something, for example, with Ghostly, we realized that orienting the experience around playlist generation was actually the most interesting part about it, and not just having it be clicking around, although that's also part of it. And
yeah,
part of
but what's the end goal? Sort of, is this a means to an end? Is there some sort of bookmarking? Are you saving images? Are you saving text? Are you reading something? Is there some way that you're collecting this information? Cool. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about machine learning and archives, which is the kind of what this talk is about. And so a little bit of like background on it. I think I wanted to talk a bit about the community around this and why it is so incredible right now. So there's a ton more to the community than this, but there's kind of like this unprecedented level of educational materials available in the machine learning world. The first thing I'd just give a shout out to Gene Kogan, who I think did one of these talks and is very qualified. He has something called ML4A, Machine Learning for Artists. It has a ton of really great resources on it. If you guys are interested in this stuff, you should check it out. Fast AI, this is an free online course that offers practical deep learning for coders, introduction to machine learning for coders, and like I think there's actually 3 other courses. Linear algebra, natural language, all this stuff. It's amazing that it's all online. All the videos are free. They're all really good. They won't be relevant in like a year probably, but actually, no, most of it will be, but really amazing that all of this is free. There's places like Towards Data Science. I read this blog all the time. This is a Medium blog that's just really great article. If you're curious about anything, if you want a breakdown of k-means, k-nearest neighbors algorithm and how it works, you'll find it on there. And then just like so many tutorials. Weights and Biases is a great tutorial series online. The Stanford CS231 Convolutional Neural Networks for Visual Recognition is online and free. I think this is free, yeah. Andrew Ng's machine learning Coursera course. So, and then even like, this is a website called distill.pub that has all of these incredible interactive demos of kind of like deeper and deeper technical topics. So these are all, I mean, this is interesting to us, not from just the fact that it's about machine learning, but also it's an interactive article on science, which is really interesting, showing like activations within convolutional neural networks and things like that.
And this is a great resource if you're interested in learning and using machine learning or just wanting to know more about it. This is good for all different skill levels in terms of just getting an overview.
It's more towards advanced, actually, but it's pretty good. And then there's, kind of wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about a specific machine learning technique that came out more recently. This is called TSNE, T-Distributed Stochastic Neighbor Embedding, sorry. Essentially, it's an algorithm that is used to take data sets and do something called dimensionality reduction. I talked about this earlier. Essentially, it can take high dimensional feature vectors and display them in a 2D space, kind of organize them. So we see that here in the, this is actually, so we'll just jump right into, I think this is in the wrong spot. Well, anyways, actually this is a good spot because this uses TSNE. But TSNE is used to organize these fonts into, based on some feature extraction, to organize them into clusters that you can explore. Yeah, so this was created by Lawrence van der Matten. So kind of the background, so TSNE came out and then was used by a bunch of researchers to kind of visualize a lot of their data for their own purposes to see how things are clustering. And then this guy, Andre Karpathy, took, I think he was probably the first one to do this, took the feature vectors from these images and used them. So he took this large data set. Let me see, this is a video here, and organized all of these images kind of by their semantic fingerprints. So you can see, like, I don't know how well you can see this, but like a lot of the ocean photos are up there, a lot of plant photos over there. These are animals, these are all dogs. So really large image maps of organizing these images into a 2D space. So TSNE is one thing that we're looking at when we do a lot of these image-based, or it doesn't even have to be image-based, actually. It can be based on metadata, things like that. But making a 2D map of everything, a way that you can kind of explore things and look at the distance between all these objects. It's almost like you would do if you were sorting everything out on a table. Another thing we do, or another common technique, is something called is a graph analysis. So this is a project, this is X degrees of separation from Google Arts and Culture. And essentially the idea is you choose two artworks from their data set, and then they're gonna give you the shortest path between them. So same technique we're using in the Spotify playlist. We construct a graph of, all these, they probably construct a graph of millions of images, and then they find the shortest path between them in that multiple dimension space. Really, really cool project. I love this. This was, I think, Mario Klingemann and a few others worked on this, but I think we have sound on this next one. Okay, so this is, I'm just gonna jump right into just a few archive explorations that we've been looking at. We really take a lot of inspiration from. So this first one is from Google. Let's see how loud this is. The Infinite Drum Machine. pretty wacky thing. Basically, what they did is they collected a huge set of samples, and they performed a feature extraction on the samples. They looked at the spectrogram, so what's all of the content, how loud is this sample basically at specific frequency bands? So, is it like really loud at a low note? Is it loud at a high note, or is it? And then they performed t-SNE on that to sort all these samples into a huge space. And this only works for these kind of really short impulse sounds. But then they let you choose different parts of a drum machine, kind of click and drag different parts of a drum machine. And I think this kind of touches on something that I don't even think we got to include in this talk that we're interested in, which is the idea of machine learning tools as also as creative tools that you could totally see this. If you replaced all of these with real drum sounds, you could make a very functional drum machine. And I think someone's actually taking that to market pretty soon. But a really fun way to explore and potentially actually make music. Another one, I'm just going to get all the sound ones out of the way. What was the name of this one? Bird sound?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so horrifying, but...
So the idea was it's the same exact approach where they're taking all of these bird sounds and they're putting them, they're doing that feature extraction, they're sorting them out, and it's really interesting because you're going to get like all of the ducks in one spot. Did I mute this? Okay, yeah. You're getting all the ducks in kind of like one spot, and you're getting all of these very similar sounding birds in the same space. And then the image that they're displaying is actually a spectrogram of the actual sound. Some other stuff that we're looking at, I think from a design perspective, it's not really exactly what we're looking for, but this is a website called Every Noise at Once. And it's just really cool because it starts off in the beginning with a map of all of these major genres. I think this was built, using the Spotify API. And all of these major genres, and you click in one, and all of a sudden, if you click on it, you can listen to the most popular sound in that genre. And if you click on the arrow, I think you get to see even further subgenres within it. But it's crazy, like bubble trance, electro house, Italian disco. They're all kind of also organized by semantic similarity. So total deep dive, I think, could use a lot of work in a lot of senses, but really interesting. This is one as well that, so this was, I think Microsoft put this out to kind of illustrate their Azure text search. They took the JFK documents, which had been, so is everyone familiar with it? JFK was assassinated. There were all these documents that were classified for a long time, and all these conspiracy theorists were like, oh, the graphenol. They finally declassified them recently, and it was so many documents. It doesn't say on this page, an insane amount of documents around this. And so they took them all and used their technology to automatically to do a bunch of text search on it. And I think this design was really interesting because you could kind of, it kind of had a sense of paranoia to it. You type in Oswald, and it's like, wait, oh, there. Which is kind of like conspiracy theorist. I think also a lot of design paradigms I think we would change about this, but interesting nonetheless. And I think there are maybe not so many examples, so we like to look at all of them. This is a really well done experiment by Google Arts and Culture. So this is the curators table, or the curator table. This is a giant image t-SNE. I think this is their entire collection. And you can just look around by visual similarity of their entire collection. I think what's really incredible about this is that they achieved so much performance for how many images there are in that website. And then you could look up a specific artist and see their work sort of organized in the same way. This was a project with another one with Google, so we're just going to be nonstop plugging Google over here. So MoMA had historical images of all of their exhibitions from the 30s on, but they didn't actually have documents that said who was in what exhibitions. And so Google actually they paired up with Google to automatically identify a lot of the artwork that was in these past exhibitions. So there was like a really restorative aspect of this project in trying to connect, give historians context up probably on other artworks and give people the ability to find, where was Robert Rauschenberg's work shown before.
And this is, I think, another example we've talked about a lot, just because it's not necessarily for an end user to use, for someone coming to MoMA's website to use to explore their collection, but as a tool for curators to create new things. And so machine learning is great not just for, and it may even be better as kind of an intermediary set of creating tools that help people do other things non-machine learning related.
I'm not going to say Nationalmusik. I actually have never had to say this out loud. This was another image sorting algorithm. I mean, this is something that's becoming a bit more common, but I think they did a really excellent job from a design perspective of like, how do you deal with all of these images in one space? They just put them on this like 3D bubble so that when you cursor over, a specific image, it just bubbles out. It's so simple, and I love it. I would change the shape of the bubble. I'm gonna like nitpick so many of these because a lot of them I love for specific reasons, but yeah, you can see them reordering their z-index and kind of coming forward. But one place that we've actually really been admiring their work is the Yale DH Lab. So this is a project they came out with for their Meserve Kunhart collection. So pictorial tropes in this collection. The idea is basically selecting an image and seeing what category does this fit into in their collection. So pictures of military guys, portraits, and then like what percentage do they kind of match that image. So a fun experiment. I think missing some of the deep dive, it's basically, this is like the top level of what you can do with this. You can't really click on any of the ones that it links to, or. This is a project, actually I think, probably wanted this earlier because this is is this playing? Maybe it's loading. I think we were meant to crop this. So essentially, this is taking the New York Public Library's collection. We saw that the Green Book example earlier, and looking at like, can we group them, kind of stack them vertically by century created? So kind of like this, just like the Amsterdam project, like kind of going deeper down and then clicking out to see what it is, or looking at it by genre. So they have a ton of these stereoscopic views. These are like early VR projects. Funny things. And then, what other genres do they have? Menus. They have so many menus. It's really interesting. That's like a project in itself. I think there actually was, you need to find that one. I think there was one around this. And then the Yale DH Lab PixPlot, which was, so this is more from the DH Lab. This is basically another image sorting, but they did a really great job with kind of these hotspots. These are sort of like clusters, these specific things. They went and looked at these clusters and then said, oh, these are specifically, these are buildings, these are chairs, these are buttons, I guess. You know, these are people in chairs, gowns, miniatures, madams. These are all of the madams. And then I think, this project was basically around like searching the New York, Google partnered with the Times to search all of the Times has a huge photo collection, and so they wanted to like give some historical context to all of the different photos from the Times collection. So they also, Google is another Google project that they did basically mapping fashion into, that one's Turkey, into like a 2D space, being able to map different shows, see where they end up. This was Google Arts and Culture did a project with NASA has a huge photo archive. So essentially they were taking amazing color film photos of every aspect of the space race. And even now, up until now, and it's all available online. So they did a really great kind of deep dive. Is this it right here? Yeah. Into like all of these images classified on this. So instead of just putting it all in one space, they did this nice thing where you zoom in and you get into like subcategories. And you don't load the images until you kind of click on a subcategory. And so this is the category of rocket. Just another kind of interesting music map, a little goofy, like force-directed graph, but looking up Black Sabbath, then looking up Iron Maiden and seeing like what's most related. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. And like thinking about these things, what as a complete experience could this be a really interesting way to explore? And then I think lastly we just have Talk to Books, which was like a Google project that came out where you could kind of ask the library a question. So I think they're functioning much more off of semantic text relationships rather than just looking up a specific phrase. So I think there are a few different things we kind of been looking at the studio in terms of concepts that drive how and what we build. So there's a piece by this video artist Alan Warburton. I'd really recommend you check this out. It's a video essay. It's about a 10-minute video essay about working in the computer graphics world. And basically he talks about how as this gap of theory and practice widens, you end up with spectacle, speculation, and what he calls spam. So he's kind of defining spectacle as the commercial studio, like unnecessary labor, and it kind of relies on fetishizing like spectacle, right? This big production, this big to-do. And it's kind of just entertainment for trade show. It's like content without content. And he also then defines speculation as sort of like the academy. He's like attacking the video art aesthetic, the net art aesthetic. And he's basing that off of kind of like, basically the speculation kind of represents the institution, media, like network infrastructure, labor. And he's kind of defining this spam as being right in the middle, which is like, he's saying these two kind of disparate, these two sides of this world miss out on the cool things that happen when you use software. And so what that has to do with us is if you're not engaging with what you're working with directly, I think that you're kind of missing out on the more interesting aspects of what can be done. So yeah. Another thing we're kind of looking at is this article. So I don't know if anyone knows who Jaron Lanier is. He's was like granddaddy VR, and he's a really interesting futurist. But he talks about how, so in The Myth of AI, he talks about how AI is particularly useful for some things, for like pattern recognition, but that we tend to kind of mythologize AI too much. So we personify AI, we see it as a threat, we expect too much from it. and that over the course of the development of artificial intelligence, that has led to kind of these dark ages, these winters in AI, where we've expected way too much of it, and then been like, oh, it can't do anything, we're not paying attention to it. Currently, we're in sort of peak AI. It's used for everything. Google is using it for like all of their stuff. I think it's gone from being like image recognition being kind of state of the art and really wild to being almost like it doesn't impress me that much anymore. So I think we really believe in being AI realists. So I think looking at like, we get a lot of clients that come to us and say, oh, we want the AI to do this. And it's usually like, okay, first of all, I don't think it can do that. And second of all, I think there's an issue with kind of expecting that AI can do anything instead of looking at what can it do and how can I apply that to what I'm trying to do. Yeah. So I think we're really trying to be respectful of AI in a lot of senses and recognize that it's very powerful, but also dumb at the same time, I guess. So there's been a lot of talk about how YouTube's feedback loop is like toxic and dangerous. It's been radicalizing a lot of people, and recognizing that these things are really powerful in that sense, yet dumb in other senses. Also recognizing, so this is Dana Boyd. This is a really great talk I'd recommend. She talked about how these algorithms can be taken advantage of by bad actors. But also when we talk about the myth of AI, I think it's also important to recognize that like the myth, even if you can't truly implement AI on a scale, on a project that would be problematic, even the practice of trying to deploy it on that is problematic. So this is one paper that came out recently, automated inference on criminality using face images. So this was basically the idea behind the paper was like, we're gonna take pictures of people's faces and we'll determine whether or not they're criminals. And if you know anything about history, this is physiognomy. This is like a well-known pseudoscience from the 18th and 19th century, I think. And it's insane. Like, how you look is whether or not you're a criminal is the basis of so much of what's wrong with the world. And so even if this paper wasn't really that successful, but even the practice of trying to do this, or something like, this is a recent one, AI used for first time in job interviews in UK to find the best applicants. I mean, maybe, I don't know particularly what they're basing it off of, but I think it was supposed to be image-based. So it's still an issue, and even if these things aren't successful, they're still problematic in the approach. So all of this kind of weighs into like not trying to promote AI as a myth and instead trying to be very realistic about it. It does this specific thing, we use it for this. It's not a sentient being that's coming to take your job or your family. Yeah.
And I think the thing in particular that we've really collecting and organizing information is the thing that we're most excited about with AI, and that's something that we've been trying to use throughout our work. So just to kind of wrap things up, why archives? Why do archives matter? We live in a very interesting time right now. There's misinformation campaigns happening all over the globe. Actors from all over are trying to influence other countries' elections. You saw Iran was just trying to interfere in American elections. The Philippines had lots of interference in their elections with misinformation campaigns. And they're basically, I think that we look at this and see that we can't take the benefits of a learned, knowledgeable, liberal society for granted, because these are things that are very important. And there are many times in history when we've lost great batches of human knowledge, and we will never be able to recover those. I was just reading a book called The Darkening Age by Catherine Nixie, and it's about how in the early years of Christianity, there was widespread destruction of the artifacts, literature, and cultural heritage of Hellenistic civilization. And you saw the widespread defacement of lots of works of art, the destruction of many great wonders of the world, of temples, because they were to pagan gods. And the really scary thing is you look back, there's a stat in this book, 90% of all Greek and Roman literature has been lost to the world. And these were vibrant, literate societies. There were some 90% of the population of Rome was literate, which is an amazing statistic when you think about today. And so much of this has been lost. We really can't take it for granted, the value of knowledge and its preservation going forward. And we live in very interesting times because we're going digital. And there's a new phrase going around that we might be entering the new digital dark age. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but magnetic hard drives have a longevity of about 20 years before they stop working. And so when you think about this whole period of people not storing original copies of things and just going digital, this is basically whole future generations might find it impossible, if not just extremely difficult, to try to piece together our historical period right now as we're living. MySpace accidentally lost 12 years worth of music. So this is a period of indie music, of all this new independent music creation, completely lost, totally vanished. We'll never be able to get those songs back. I don't know how many of them were amazing and people still want to listen to, but still, for the very fact of that it existed, we created its cultural artifacts, there's an inherent value in preserving them. This is what.cd was a piracy site. So
really?
not it was the first search. Anyway, it got shut down a few years ago, and not condoning piracy here at all, but it was called the Library of Alexandria of its time because there was a system of putting bounties on finding music, and people were finding obscure presses, obscure prints of all this music. They would have every single pressing of a record.
Well, not only was it, so what was really interesting about what CD as well is not only was it the music, but they also had a whole series of lists and forums where people would talk about the music. They would create context for different albums. They would say this is a Balearic playlist. You want to listen to all of these albums. And that we still have.
We have the list, but anyway, I'm just pointing out how a lot of these things, we take them for granted. We're generating a lot of cultural information, and if we don't justify their value and work towards their preservation, we're going to lose a lot of it. So the Internet Archive is one organization that's working to do a lot of this preservation work. Rhizome, they're also based out of the New Museum with us, and they have done a lot of great work around preserving early internet art. Their net art anthology is excellent and worth looking at. And they're also working on a product called Web Recorder, which is trying to preserve things as they're created so that they can play in their original formats and styles. So all this is to say, basically we think about our work in the context of trying to take cultural ideas, cultural artifacts, cultural heritage, and creating new lenses, new perspectives, and new ways of seeing them to help people discover meaning in those collections. And hopefully through that, by helping to create an emotional bond between people and an archive and a collection, that we can further the preservation of human knowledge in the future. Thank you very much.
So should we open up to some questions?
Yeah, we'd love to take your guys' questions. Is someone vacuuming out there?
I don't know.
Thank you for the beautiful talk. I really wondered about when I'm thinking about this stuff. The thing really bothers me most of the time that when we're looking at all this stuff, it's always in the mostly, as you said, in 2D, in 2 dimensions, or maybe when you're trying to use them in the 3 dimensions, it gets really confusing and it's really hard to understand and grasp. But also, when I'm thinking about all this, like you said that when you are looking on a normal library's catalog, you will always sweep, and it's basically a one-dimensional system. And we are trying to make it like onto like 2 or maybe 3. We are trying to reduce the dimensions that we have from the beginning, and we are trying to sort them out into a smaller dimension. That's the main idea. But what really bothers me on that too, that I think the medium that we are using is maybe not so that sufficient. For example, the drum machine actually fascinated me much more than any of these, because when you're always looking at a 2-dimensional thing, it gets kind of repetitive after a while. And also I know that we can use colors and maybe hex values, because it's like, I don't know, humanistic or right something, but in general, like vibration and or other stuff, what's your idea, what's your opinion on different mediums to using them? I know that they are hard to implement because of the commercial sides, and you cannot basically sell a device to understand data much better, because it will be pricey and it will be hard to implement, but to embellish the experience, what would you suggest, or what's your opinion on this?
So you're asking whether or not we think there are other devices that would be more suited to this type of exploration than a computer?
Yeah, kind of like.
I mean, I think we're focused on kind of the web as an interface because it is so democratic and approachable. And what's really amazing is we build something on the web and we can look at the statistics and see that 100,000 people looked at it. And just where you get that kind of impression anywhere else is really difficult. And I also think that you do end up with a lot of, like, regardless, it is kind of screen-based, what we do. So we could maybe take this out from a laptop and put it on a big touchscreen, and I think that could be interesting, and we definitely are interested in that. Where I guess where I could see the projects that we do breaking out of the browser into kind of a physical space. I was actually in Vienna over the winter and saw an exhibition by, who's the director?
Wes Anderson.
Wes Anderson. He curated an exhibition at, I think it was Kunsthistorisches, the Natural Art, Historical Art Museum. And what he did was he took all of these objects from the collection and sorted them based on visual similarity, and even put them in these lines of like visual similarity on like an x-axis, you know, like how they look sorted visually on one axis. And I was like, wow, this is literally what we've been trying to do in the browser in real life. And I think curatorially, like, people hated it, but I could see that being one place for sure where we could be using some of our approaches to build exhibitions, and we'd really like to do that, I think.
Hello, it was a wonderful speech, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm really interested in the relationship between typography and artificial intelligence, and you have a project on that.
We do, yeah. So we were working for a while. We've kind of put it to the side for a minute. We spent about 6 months doing research on basically training a neural network or using machine learning to identify partially generative, partially identification, feature extraction of fonts. We did a ton of research on it. We have one data scientist and me, and I don't get to do a lot of the heavy lifting. He does most of it. And we spent 6 months on it, and then Google Brain just came out with this paper. After we were breaking our back over this, they came out with this paper. They're like, we figured it out. It took us no time, and we're not going to release the code. And we were like, oh, God damn it! It really broke us. And that's one of the big things that we're always up against is sort of like, Google. We saw like Creative Lab just has all of these resources and amazing technology, and they achieve all these amazing things. And we're like, I feel like we're in a barn, like.
But sorry, your question.
And my question is about the design and the relationship between design, artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's all about form, function, and also aesthetics. So how we can generate ideas and teach machine learning about aesthetics, which is an abstract concept.
I actually think that, so my take on this is that I feel like there are two camps for like machine learning and creativity. And so one of them I feel like the initial thought that you approach it with is, I want AI to generate things for me. I want them to generate paintings. I want them to generate music, or them. I want an AI to generate these things for me. And that's the point of it, right? And I think the actual approach is about aiding creativity. So like, how can you create AI that's going to help you design better, select a font better? How are you going to create AI that will maybe suggest samples better or help you explore sample space better for making music? And so I think it's less about teaching it. It's kind of teaching it aesthetics, I guess, because you're teaching it the difference between these fonts. Or you're teaching it the difference between these songs. But I think in the end, it's maybe more about aiding the creator in making their own creative judgments. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, great speech, by the way. This might be the out of context a bit, but you said that you were wandering around the Bytes magazine and all those retro content. Did you find anything special or interesting towards the future predictions?
I mean, it's all, geez. I don't know.
I have to say, we were mostly going, so we scraped all of the Byte magazines that are on, and most of the other computer magazines that are on the Internet Archive. We were mostly using it for aesthetics, because honestly, my favorite part are the ads. The graphic design is so crazy. It's like a small shop in Texas, like advertising their like chipboards in like the 70s and like crazy typography, crazy graphics. In terms of predictions, we didn't read as much of the Byte magazines as much as going through and taking it for kind of aesthetic.
Well, the scope in those magazines is so different too, because those were all about like home computer users. So they would be like, we got our hands on the Texas Instruments latest RAM board, and now we can play Space Invaders. And you're like, and now the scope is like almost like world domination level. Like the tech industry has changed completely from and that's where Apple sort of got their foundation, was like starting with personal computing and growing from there, right? Like little garage built computers. But I think in terms of future, I don't know. It's all so different now, I think, in so many ways.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for this very informative presentation. I want to ask, are you only using the existing archives or data, or are you also generating some and integrate that to your training process?
Yeah, so I think we tend to look for like established data sets, because all data sets are made by people basically, and I guess we helped with making the one for Nobel. That was but that was a big project that was over 1,000 items, like assets that had to be tagged and organized.
Digital type, so our typography thing,
true, yes.
We've been building that archive ourselves, and the Center for American Politics and Design, we've also been building that ourselves.
But those are
it's
much
a lot
smaller.
of work, and that's another reason why we love working with museums and cultural institutions, because they have such amazing data sets, and there's a whole field of library science and curatorial organizational practices that we didn't go to school for that, and it's great to work with people that did and are experts at that.
So sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes, if that answered your question.
I try not to.
I was wondering, when you working with AI projects, you need archive, right? You know, we saw the pictures, the sounds, the music, but it's basically archive, what we call the basically data, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was wondering, after this cloud projects, the big data theories or some stuff, what will the future about the AI, future of the AI? Because it's all out there. Imagine that all the data is floating. It's all up there in cloud or big data. So how we will regulate the AI to not to do stuff or to do stuff? What will be the future? You have an idea?
Well, I think it's a great point that there are so many other applications. Like, I just think that there are. I guess let me take a step back. I think first thing, it's important not to look at the AI as something that needs to be in itself regulated. It's more about like how are corporations applying it that may need to be regulated, but it's not going to be something that's invasively trawling the internet or kind of like supervising your life or anything like that. I think one way that's really great, this venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz, Benedict Evans, talks about like ways to look at AI. And I think one of the most important ways, he just published an article about this, was looking at it as a microservice, looking at it like we looked at databases in the earlier internet. And so it's much less going to be like this big omnipotent category of its own, and it's much more likely to be a smaller service that's like integrated within all of your products. So instead of being, it won't be this big monster within like the cloud. It'll be much more a smaller portion of your Photos app that helps you find, and they're already doing this, right? Helps you find photos of your dog or photos of your friend of yours. Like, let me get all the photos of this person. So I don't know if I think it's going to be much more about regulating tech companies than regulating AI itself. Does that answer your question?
Great speech, by the way, for the fifth time. I was particularly interested in two things that I think the same question, but maybe in different realms. First, the accessibility and the linkability within the digital realm, which I mean is even if you're generating or tagging your own data, or even if data has come from a different place, there's this sort of, even if you try to be objective, there's this bias, this subjectivity, this portrayal of this data in a certain way. And while you're talking about this tagging process, is there any ways that you're imagining in terms of being able to access other people's archive making process, or opening up your projects into other people for accessing these, for example, tagging definitions, so that they can access it so that this subjectivity is just a bit more multi-dimensionalized and becomes maybe like a way of looking at archive itself. And the second one is in terms of digital preservation, what you were talking about, the digital dark age. I don't know if you know, there's this place called the Long Now Foundation that is really trying to, help people to think in very long durations of time, long-term thinking. And is there any way that you're thinking about somehow introducing analog or mechanical artifacts within this archiving?
Well, I guess I could talk about the first point.
Yeah, I can give you my thoughts on the second. I don't have the answer, but
I think on the first point, I think that's just kind of comes to like open, kind of collaborative open data sets, right? And I can't speak as much to like that approach yet, but
Wiki, I feel like is a great model for that in terms of standardizing form entry and.
Yeah, we didn't even show Mel.
Yeah,
there's another archive we were working on that we were looking at using a wiki for, which would be the ability, would allow this website to be collaborative, so that people could basically go. It was an archive of computers, and making it so that people could go in and update these computer, like information about all these early computers on their own. So it would be a collaborative set. I think Google actually is kind of making an attempt with arts and culture, but then I think that there's all sorts of politics on that with, we've heard a lot of cultural institutions being really unhappy with how it worked out for them. So I don't know. It would be amazing to have some sort of collective, maybe you could consider the internet as a whole as one big data set.
And in terms of the digital dark age, I don't think we have the answers necessarily. Internet Archive and Rhizome are doing some good work on that. I think it's also, this is kind of just a weird historical period in early computing. I think as things have migrated to the cloud, a lot of things are going to be copied forward. So that's important. It's a huge issue. I know they're doing research into actually storing things with DNA. So using CRISPR-9 to record data in DNA. It's something like all the world's information could fit into like something the size of a bucket of water of DNA, which is crazy. It's nowhere close to being a practicable solution.
Currently, I think the preeminent archival method is tape. So you take all of these spinning hard disks, you record it onto magnetic tape, and you put it in cold storage, and like that's it. I guess I kind of wonder a lot about like how you consider digital information is its rival, right? It's easily destroyed, and you think about that, but then you also consider that like paper burns. I don't know what it gets back to this like how do you make information permanent? Is that even possible?
And should we keep all of it?
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, I don't know that I need my middle school dance pictures and stuff, or like maybe I do personally, but
I need those.
I don't know if historians need them. But yeah.
Hi. Following up with that, I was kind of curious, since there's so much data, then what's the maybe consensus of like which data will be stored for the future, or who decides that? Is it the tech companies? Is it like individual projects, or does it seem like it'll be more of a collective thing where we can all participate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't even know if we know how much data is collected on all of us. I mean, I think when you consider that, all of these credit monitoring agencies have so many points of data on you, and I guess you could find some of it now because a lot of it's been hacked and published. But what data to keep is a really great question. I think that I read an article about this recently, which was talking about kind of the environmental impact of all of this data. Like there's a New York Times article from about 2012, and they talk about how corporations are just, it doesn't cost them that much, so they just keep everything. But I think probably the downside to all of that is that eventually you have to sort through it and see what's important.
Yeah, and they're all on server farms, which have to be kept cool and are not like environmentally friendly. I mean, Google buys offsets for their server farm, like green energy offsets, but even still, it's. I don't know. I mean, the price is going to go down on storage, so like this, we're approaching physical limits on how much data we can store on things because we're getting to such a small scale on chips, but it's been going down, you know, Moore's law. So presumably it'll get cheaper to store, and presumably the tools for exploring and gaining insights from that will be better in the future, and they're already way more sophisticated than they used to be.
Can I ask one more thing then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Following up with that, do you think maybe the AI will be trained to decide the relevancy of like what can be kept? Is that a path that they're thinking about, or?
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I don't know if that's a specific application that's being looked at now, but that totally could be. I think it's what's really interesting about using AI to do like machine learning. Let's just say machine learning to do a process like that is that it's only going to make those decisions based on everything that it already knows, and it's never going to really be projecting into the future on what it knows. So you may end up with a situation where a kind of a feedback loop where like you're only keeping data because you've only kept that data and so far. So it's tough to kind of like look at that as a solution when it could have a feedback loop that that leads to it not functioning correctly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this lovely presentation, and thank you all for coming. Our next event will be on December 7th with Mario Klingemann. So just stay tuned for more information about the program. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.